He was responsible for his best friend's death over money, cried at the funeral, and then walked out of prison 30 years later smiling for selfies on the same block where the remains were discovered. His name was Alberto Martinez. Harlem called him Alpo. Born June 8, 1966, East Harlem. Father never present. Mother raised him alone in the East River housing projects with his younger sister. By his early teens, he was running with a theft crew, throwing trash cans off highway bridges onto the FDR Drive to stop traffic, moving through the stuck cars taking anything worth taking. By 13, a local street seller named Petaway had him working a corner at 5 in the morning. When older men asked why a kid that young was out there at that hour, Petaway said the boy had a talent for it. He was right. Alpo did not drink, did not smoke. He woke early and treated money like something to accumulate and protect. That discipline, locked inside a world with no exits, would eventually harm many people around him. Around 15, a Harlem street figure named Randy Love took Alpo in. Randy settled disputes through force, and he showed Alpo what holding territory actually required. Earning money was not enough. You had to protect it by any means. Together, they began targeting Colombian and Dominican stash locations. Here is where Alpo's particular gift first showed itself. He was Puerto Rican, but his complexion read as black to most people. He used that. He would walk into a stash location first, posing as a small buyer. While the men inside spoke openly in Spanish, certain he could not understand, Alpo memorized the room, where the products sat, where the money was, who would fight and who would not. He reported back to Randy, and they came in armed, calculated, violent, and destructive. Eventually, he saved enough to buy a storefront in East Harlem and run his own operation. The problem was reliable source. Without a reliable source, the business stalled every few weeks. He needed to get inside a real crew, and he was not too proud to ask. On the west side of Harlem, a young man named Azi Faison had built something the whole borough was whispering about. Azi had started by operating out of his mother's building, pricing his pricing aggressively and keeping supply consistent that buyers came from everywhere. He eventually bought a storefront on 145th Street, converted it into a game room full of arcade machines, and used it as cover for an operation moving large quantities each day, several $100,000 a week. The streets called it the jukebox. Azi drove Audis. He moved quietly. He did not want attention, but his name got around anyway. Alpo tracked him down after a basketball game at Rucker Park, pulled up on a dirt bike, said he wanted to do business. Azi said he would think about it. He kept a tight circle and did not trust easily. What changed his mind was Rich Porter. Rich Porter was Azi's closest friend, a Harlem figure known for generosity as much as for money. The kind of man who remembered names, who gave without being asked, who made everyone around him feel like they mattered. He had just finished a year in the Bronx House Detention Center on a weapons charge. While he was inside, Azi called and asked his opinion on Alpo. Rich said he was solid, that they had done a few small deals, that Azi could trust him. That endorsement was enough. Not long after Alpo joined the team, he proved Rich right in a way Azi never forgot. Someone had attacked Azi on the street. The men around him were talking about what they were going to do. Alpo listened for a few seconds, said he would be back in 15 minutes, ran to East Harlem, grabbed 2 weapons, and returned. Almost everyone who had been there for the conversation was gone. Alpo came back ready. That was the moment Azi understood exactly who he had just brought in. The jukebox on 145th was printing money. It was also attracting exactly the kind of attention that destroys operations. Local robbery crews had started treating it like a scheduled stop. They came in, closed the gate, took the cash and the stash, and walked out. Nobody got hurt. The losses were adding up. But more than the money, the pattern itself was the problem. Let it continue, and everyone in Harlem would know the spot had no teeth. AZ was not built for violence. He got his money in the shadows and preferred to keep it that way. When the raids kept coming, his red was, too much attention from law enforcement. Time to move on. He shifted focus to a new spot he was building on 134th Street and called a meeting to decide the jukebox's future. His brother passed. His lieutenant Stanley, a man who had been with AZ since the beginning, passed. The spot had too many problems. Then AZ asked Alpo. Alpo said yes before AZ finished the sentence. He saw what everyone else saw, the raids, the exposure, the attention, and decided it was an opportunity, not a liability. He was being handed a proven operation for nothing. He just had to be willing to do what the others were not. He found out where the stick-up crew operated. 2 men lost their lives on the corner of 145th and 7th Avenue not long after. The raids stopped completely. No one came back. Alpo now had a spot, a crew, and a connect. He started building. By the mid-1980s, 3 names ran Harlem street conversation. AZ was the architect, structured, quiet, always 3 moves ahead. Alpo was the operator with the edge, visible, commanding, willing to go further than anyone else. And Rich Porter was the one everybody loved. Rich was the center of gravity. He had warmth Alpo never possessed, a generosity that was genuine rather than calculated, a reputation built entirely on how he treated people. Alpo and Rich became inseparable, matching white convertible BMWs, custom pieces from Dapper Dan on 125th Street, a designer who turned luxury brand patterns into something the streets had never seen. LL Cool J, who ran in that same circle, later said Rich and Alpo shaped how he thought about presenting himself to the world. Rich was the one person Alpo seemed to drop the calculations around. They were close the way brothers are close, where trust stops being a decision and becomes automatic. You stop measuring the other person because you assume the measurement is already settled. That assumption would cost Rich everything. In 1986, a trip to Myrtle Beach led to Virginia Beach, and Virginia Beach led to Washington, D.C. Alpo saw D.C. the way a contractor sees an open job site. He moved in through a girlfriend named Karen, whose connections ran deep in the city, attached himself to a well-respected local operator named Curtis Chambers, known as Kurt Bone, and set himself up as a bulk supplier at prices nobody in DC could match. The money exceeded anything he had ever made in Harlem. He worked hard to stay invisible. DC had a history of dealing harshly with New Yorkers who came down to operate. Alpo bought a Chevy Blazer because that was what DC drove. He kept his voice down and tried to blend. It did not fully work. His reputation moved ahead of him. When Kurt Bone got swept up in the federal indictments that dismantled DC's dominant organization in 1989, he arranged for a young enforcer from Southeast DC named Shelton Watkins, Shorty Pop, to watch Alpo's back before going in. Through Shorty Pop, Alpo was introduced to the most feared person he would ever meet. Wayne Perry's name did not come up in conversation in Washington, D.C. without the word killing nearby. Federal investigators described Perry as one of the most suspected killers they had ever documented in the district. He was accused of brazen public shootings in front of crowds, more than once. Every single time, The witnesses refused to say his name. Prosecutors dismantled everyone around him. Nobody who had actually watched Perry act ever stood in a courtroom and confirmed it. He was operating on a different level of fear entirely. In 1989, Perry was in jail on a serious charge with a $100,000 bail he could not cover. Shorty Pop brought the information to Alpo. 10%, $10,000. In exchange, an alliance with the one man in DC that everyone else was afraid to touch. Alpo paid it the same day. He did not approach Perry immediately after his release. He let time move. He made sure Perry heard through Shorty Pop who had paid. Then he waited. Not long after Perry got out, Alpo was set up. A supposed deal turned into an ambush. 4 masked men. He ran. He was hit in the ribs, but he kept moving. He made it to a hospital under a false name and lay in a bed convinced he was dying. A DC detective came for a statement. Alpo, believing it was over, gave him everything. The network, the buyers, the full structure of his DC operation. He did not die. He was gone before the detective returned the next morning. What came next was not panic. It was calculation. He had Wayne Perry, a bullet scar, and a list. What followed over the next 2 years was not a war. It was more controlled than that. Alpo and Perry operated with a methodical patience that made them hard to track. They used a customized van that federal investigators, after running forensic tests on it, found contained multiple distinct blood types. The van investigators linked to multiple killings. Perry handled the Northeast crew that had shot Alpo. That chapter closed fast. Then Alpo sent Shorty Pop to remove a potential rival named Matthew Blake. Then came Demencio Benson, a Brooklyn figure operating in DC who had history with Alpo. Alpo invited him to a basketball tournament. During the game, they had words. Alpo extended his hand as if to squash it. Benson walked over to shake. As they gripped hands, Alpo gave a small nod over Benson's shoulder. Shorty Pop stepped in and shot Benson at close range in front of hundreds of people. Not one witness spoke to law enforcement afterward. A customer named Andre Johnson was removed over a situation involving a woman connected to Alpo's crew. A witness who had agreed to cooperate with investigators was abducted and later found dead. Even a woman at a concert, believed to be talking too freely about what she had heard, was tracked down and attacked, leaving the building. Federal prosecutors eventually charged Alpo in 14 homicides across New York, Maryland, and DC. The investigators who built the case believed the real number was higher. Every other name in that list fades eventually. The one that does not is Rich Porter. Here is how it started. Alpo had a Dominican connect in Harlem, a man fronting him large quantities at favorable prices. Because Alpo was spending most of his time in Washington, he arranged for Rich to act as the pickup point. Whatever the connect charged Rich, Alpo was supposed to receive his half at the exact same rate. For months it worked. Then the prices Rich quoted started climbing. A little at first. Enough to notice but easy to explain. The connect's prices shifted. A different source. Alpo paid without pressing. He understood how margins worked. He was patient. Then he ran into his connect at a club in Harlem. Alpo asked when the man was going to start showing him some love on prices. The connect stared at him. He said, "I just handed Rich a large shipment." He described the packaging in detail. He described the stamps on the product. The details matched exactly what Alpo had recently paid top price for. Alpo told him, "We never had this conversation." Then he drove back to Washington and did the math. Rich had been receiving product at the connect's rate and billing Alpo at a marked up price, The difference, by Alpo's count, had run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, over months, between two people who called each other brothers. He called Rich, gave him one final opportunity. Asked directly, where did the last batch come from? Rich said it came from his own connect. He looked Alpo in the face and lied. Alpo had already decided what that answer meant. What came next carries weight that goes beyond what it looked like on the surface. Because at the exact same moment Alpo was making this decision, Rich was coming apart. His 12-year-old brother Donald had been abducted weeks earlier on the way to school. The family had received a mutilation threat sent through the mail, a ring with the boy's name on it, a cassette recording of Donald crying, pleading for his family to rescue him. Rich was not sleeping. He was barely functioning. He called Alpo and asked him to come to Harlem. He needed to move supply quickly to raise ransom money. He needed his brother back. January 3rd, 1990. Alpo drove up from DC with a man named Big Head Gary, his closest DC associate, the man who had been beside him through most of what happened in that city. They picked Rich up in Harlem. The three of them drove. At some point, Alpo asked directly, where did that last package come from? Rich gave the same answer he had given on the phone. Alpo looked into the rearview mirror. Gary raised the revolver and fatally shot Rich. Rich's hand locked onto the door handle. The grip tightened as if the body was trying to finish something the mind could not. Alpo had to physically pull his hand free. They drove around with Rich in the back seat for close to an hour. Nobody spoke much. They found a wooded area near Orchard Beach in the Bronx and moved the body into a wooded area. As they were moving the body, Alpo heard a sound, something he could not place. He took the gun from Gary and fired again to make sure he was dead. Then they drove back to the city. That same night, Alpo crossed AZ on a street corner in Harlem. He asked casually if AZ had seen Rich around. AZ said Rich was probably home asleep. He noticed fresh scratches across Alpo's face. Alpo said he had gotten into it with a woman in DC. He said he had things to handle and walked off. A short time later, a page from AZ's mother. He called back. She said they had found Pat's brother. AZ assumed she meant Donald had been found safe. He called Rich's sister Pat to say he was relieved. Pat was crying so hard she could barely get the words out. It was not Donald they had found. It was Rich. At the wake, Alpo walked in and signed the guest register in large, bold letters. Then he stood in the room and grieved in front of people who did not yet know what he had done. Donald's remains were found a few weeks later, 1 mile from where Rich had been left. The kidnapping, it turned out, had been organized by Rich's own uncle, a man named John Apple Porter, who had been sitting in the family home through every painful day of that ordeal, playing the role of grieving relative while orchestrating the ransom. He eventually cooperated with federal investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. By late 1991, federal investigators had built enough of a case to move. On the morning of November 24th, a surveillance team had been watching an apartment in Washington where Alpo was known to come and go. He was outside with his girlfriend when a man walking past caught his eye. Something was wrong about the way the man moved. Alpo reached for his weapons. The police lights came on simultaneously from 3 directions. His girlfriend floored the accelerator. One agent pulled her through the open window while the car was still moving. Another held him at gunpoint before he could get the car into drive. When they brought him into the federal building, the arresting officer had placed a can of Alpo brand dog food on his desk as a joke. Alpo saw it. He smiled for his booking photo. 14 homicide counts. A RICO case. The capital punishment on the table. Alpo's lawyer laid it out plainly. The evidence was there. This was not a fight worth having. The question was what the rest of his life looked like. The government's offer was specific. They wanted Wayne Perry more than they wanted Alpo. If Alpo built the case that put Perry away, the capital punishment came off the table entirely. Alpo took the deal. He helped set a trap that led to the seizure of the van. He cooperated in building the case against Perry and the crew. He confessed to all 14 homicide counts, including 4 in New York, for which he received full immunity. Wayne Perry was convicted and sentenced to life without parole. He was sent to ADX Florence Supermax in Colorado, 23 hours a day in isolation. Over the years that followed, Perry sent messages through intermediaries that said the same thing. Alpo was a man without honor who had survived by informing on people who trusted him to the people hunting them. Perry was not wrong. Alpo received 30 years. He walked out in 2015. Witness protection gave him a new name, an apartment in Lewiston, Maine, and a construction job. His neighbors described him as pleasant, helpful, always smiling. They had no idea who he was. Within 2 years, he had left the program. Videos appeared online. Alpo riding a motorcycle through Harlem, standing on corners that had known him decades before, surrounded by people who wanted photos and treated him like a notorious figure who had returned. Some people in Harlem welcomed him. Others believed he had no right to set foot on those streets again. The debate was loud, and he seemed to enjoy both sides of it equally. He did interviews. He did not apologize for cooperating with investigators. He argued instead that there was never a code, that self-preservation was the only real rule that existed in the streets. He was not entirely wrong, but he delivered that argument with the ease of a man who had never once lost sleep over what he had done to get here. He started posting his location on social media, clubs in other cities, boat trips, all-star weekend. He lived publicly in a way that made no practical sense for a man carrying his history. When people asked about it, he said he would rather be outside living than living in hiding for the rest of his life. In late September 2021, he almost clipped a vehicle driven by a man named Shaquem Parker while riding his motorcycle through Harlem. They argued at the scene. Alpo said something. Parker did not forget it. October 31st, 2021, Halloween. Alpo attended a party at a lounge in Harlem and went live on social media from inside, showing exactly where he was, visible to anyone who cared to look. At around 3:30 in the morning, he walked out and got into his truck. Shaquem Parker was already waiting. Parker came to the driver's side window and opened fire through the window. Alpo was hit in the chest. He managed to put the truck in gear and move, instinct more than anything. But the truck crashed on 147th Street, less than a mile from the corner where a 13-year-old version of himself had stood moving supply at 5 in the morning for Petaway. He died at the scene. He was 55 years old. The intelligence was real. The discipline was real. The ability to read people, project confidence, and make individuals feel trusted. All of it genuine. None of it made him anything other than what he was. Someone who used those gifts to take, to control, and to discard the people who got closest to him. Rich Porter is buried because he trusted his best friend. Donald Porter, 12 years old on his way to school, is buried because of a chain that began with Alpo. Families across New York, Maryland, and DC carry losses that trace directly to decisions he made in vans, in parking lots, and in the back seats of moving cars. He came home to a Harlem that could not decide what he was. He spent his last years performing the legend without reckoning with what the legend had cost. No final courtroom. No accounting to the people whose lives lost because of his decisions. Just a window, shots fired, and a truck against a curb on 147th Street. Harlem moved on. It always does. Those families never got to. Lives lost because of his decisions. Just a window, shots fired, and a truck against a curb on 147th Street. Harlem moved on. It always does. Those families never got to.